Florida is a place most people think they understand. Beaches, theme parks, endless coastline. The assumption is that nothing much happened here before the air conditioner. That assumption is wrong. Long before the condos, people here built things that do not fit the picture. A perfect ring cut into bedrock beneath downtown Miami. A wooden platform ringed with carved birds, over a pond holding the bones of 150 people. An island of nothing but shells, ruled by a kingdom that kept Spain out for 200 years. Here is the honest part most channels skip. Most of these are not really mysteries. Archaeologists understand them well, but a few still hold a question nobody has answered, and number one is the strangest. Stick with us to the end, because that story sits beneath a city of glass towers. We dig into this kind of forgotten history every week, so if you have not subscribed, now is a good time. Today we count down 10 ancient structures in Florida no one can fully explain. Let's go. Number 10. Mount Royal, the half-mile road to nowhere. In 1765, the naturalist William Bartram and his father John walked up to a sand mound on the St. Johns River, near Lake George, and wrote down one of the earliest careful descriptions of a Native American mound in North America. What caught their attention was not the mound, it was the road leading away from it. A raised avenue ran north from the mound for 3/4 of a mile. Bartram described it as level as a floor, with banks raised on either side, running dead straight to a rectangular man-made pond, roughly 12 to 25 feet wide, banks about 3 feet high, cut and built by hand. The mound itself was the ceremonial heart of a chiefdom that grew prosperous around the year 1050. The people built it from yellow sand, capped in red ochre, carried up one basket at a time. The pond at the end of the avenue was probably the borrow pit they dug the sand from. The straight road most likely served as a processional approach, a formal way into a place of the dead. When the antiquarian Clarence Moore excavated the mounds in the 1890s, he found burials laid with hammered sheet copper, polished stone tools, pearl and shell beads, and decorated pottery. Copper does not occur naturally in Florida. It came from hundreds of miles away, through trade that reached up into Georgia and beyond. Here is the detail that lingers. By the 20th century, that perfectly straight avenue had been plowed flat. You cannot see it standing on the ground. It survives only as a faint geometric scar, visible from the air, a half-mile line drawn by people 1,000 years ago. Today the mound sits on a single acre owned by the state of Florida, surrounded by a gated fly-in community. There is a sign, there is the mound, the road is gone. Most people who stand on what is left of it never know they are standing on anything at all. Number 9. The Calusa Canals. They cut a highway through an island. Start with what these people did not have. No metal tools, no draft animals, no wheel. South Florida has almost no usable stone, so even the chert for their cutting edges had to be carried in by trade. By every assumption we bring to ancient engineering, this was a culture that should not have been moving much earth at all. They moved an enormous amount of it. On Pine Island in Lee County on the southwest coast, the Calusa dug a canal 2.5 miles long, straight across the entire island, connecting the village at Pineland on the west to another site on the east. It was a canoe highway. When the archaeologist Frank Hamilton Cushing surveyed it in the 1890s, parts of it were still 30 feet wide and 6 feet deep, a full century after the Calusa were gone. That was not the only one. Near the Caloosahatchee River at Ortona, 2 more canals were dug in segments totaling about 5 miles, built specifically to let canoes bypass the river's rapids and reach a vast earthwork complex covering roughly 1,300 acres. Here is what makes this different. The Calusa were not farmers. They built all of this as hunters, fishers, and gatherers, fed almost entirely by the fish and shellfish of the estuaries. Societies that move this much earth almost always farm first. The Calusa skipped that step and built a water-based kingdom anyway, with the kind of organized labor that only works under a central authority. The Spanish, when they came, confirmed exactly that. There was a king, and there were towns linked by water the way other empires were linked by roads. A canal wide enough and deep enough to float a dugout canoe, cut clean through an island, with shell tools and digging sticks. Around 1,000 years ago, you can walk what survives on the Calusa Heritage Trail at Pineland, over the mounds and the canal remnants, in a landscape of mangrove, shell ridge, and old citrus grove. Most of the original length is gone, plowed and developed away since the 1800s. And a recent hurricane took a hard swing at the trail itself. 1,000 years of digging, and in many places you could cross it now without ever noticing your feet had left flat ground. Number 8. Lake Jackson Mounds. The Birdman in the copper. This story starts with a mound being hauled away as fill dirt. In the 1970s, just north of Tallahassee, A private landowner was quietly dismantling one of the earthen mounds on his property, trucking the soil off to be used as fill. A state archaeologist named Calvin Jones ran a salvage dig before it disappeared completely. Inside, in layer after layer, he found the burials of a ruling class. They had been buried with repoussé copper breastplates, copper axes, pearls, engraved shell ornaments, and stone pipes. 9 of those copper breastplates came out of the ground. They were embossed with hawk dancers and falcons, with priest chiefs in full bird costume, the imagery of a religion that spanned half a continent. Lake Jackson was the capital of a Fort Walton chiefdom that flourished from around 1050 to 1500. It was the southernmost major center of the Mississippian world, a vast cultural network that reached up to Wisconsin and west to Oklahoma. The complex held 6 or 7 mounds arranged around a formal plaza, with a village around it. The largest mound still stands about 36 feet tall and over 270 feet across at the base. The materials tell the same story as Mount Royal, only louder. Copper, mica, greenstone, graphite, galena. None of it native to Florida. All of it carried in over enormous distances, because the people buried here were important enough to be wrapped in things from the edges of the known world. The Birdman on those plates is not a local invention. He appears on nearly identical copper at Etowah in Georgia, in styles linked to Cahokia in Illinois, part of what archaeologists call the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex. The same costumed figure, the same falcon, showing up in a North Florida mound that was, when it finally gave up its secret, already halfway to becoming somebody's fill dirt. Today the site is a state park, with a quiet trail past the surviving mounds and the ruins of an 1800s grist mill in rolling hardwood forest above the lake. The copper plates are in the Museum of Florida History in Tallahassee. 9 chiefs in copper, pulled out of a mound that was already on its way to becoming a driveway. Number 7. Letchworth-Love Mound, 6 million trips with a basket. Between Tallahassee and Monticello, in quiet North Florida woodland, stands the tallest ancient earthwork in the state. Depending on the source, it rises somewhere between 46 and 51 feet, about 300 feet wide at the base, a 5-story hill standing on flat ground. It was built by the Weedon Island and Swift Creek peoples, sometime between roughly 200 and 900 of the Common Era, and it was built the only way anything got built here, by hand. The Florida Park Service has tried to put numbers on the effort. The largest mound used an estimated 27 million gallons of soil, mixed with shells and encased in clay. To move that much earth without wheels, without animals, without metal, took an estimated 6 million separate basket loads, each one carried up from a borrow pit one trip at a time. Sit with that figure. 6 million round trips, not by a machine, by people, across generations, until a hill rose where there had been level ground. The mound was the centerpiece of a ceremonial complex that once included 10 or more mounds and 2 open plazas, leveled flat for rituals, games, and gatherings. The Big Mound reportedly had side platforms and an earthen ramp, and was likely kept clear of vegetation, its sides smoothed when it was in use. The broader area carries evidence of human presence going back 10 to 12,000 years. Here's the thing about a mound like this. From a distance it reads as scenery, a wooded rise in a state park, and the word mound makes it sound small, almost casual. The number reframes the whole thing. This was not a pile of dirt. It was a construction project measured in human lifetimes, organized by a society with the authority to keep generations of people carrying baskets toward the same slowly rising idea. Today it is a state park, with a viewing platform, a bronze model of the mound, and a trail past the smaller ones that survived. It is a birding hotspot now, quiet and rarely crowded, the kind of place you could drive past forever. A hill you can climb in 2 minutes that took generations and 6 million trips to raise. Number 6. Big Mound City. The wheel of earth no one has dug. Out at the northern edge of the Everglades in Palm Beach County, there is a structure that almost nobody sees from the ground, because from the ground it barely reads as a structure at all. From the air, it is unmistakable, a great semicircular embankment reported at around 1,500 feet across. Out of it, raised causeways radiate outward like the spokes of a wheel, each one running to a conical mound. The causeway walls still stand about 9 feet high. The largest mound is over 200 feet wide and 25 feet tall. It looks engineered, deliberate, almost mechanical, a piece of geometry sitting in a swamp. It was built by the Belle Glade people, starting around the year 1000, in a landscape one researcher described as having a flatness second only to the Everglades itself. Wet prairie, standing water up to 6 feet deep in places. And these people raised a geometric monument out of it, a hub and a ring and radiating arms, working as hunter-gatherers rather than farmers. Here is the part that earns this place its spot. Big Mound City has essentially never been excavated. Apart from a brief study in the 1930s and a survey in 2015, nobody has dug into its core. It went onto the National Register of Historic Places in 1973, the only Belle Glade site to make that list, and it is still barely understood. So when people ask what it was for, the honest answer is that we genuinely do not know. Ceremonial, mortuary, political, some combination of all three. Archaeologists who study call it poorly understood, and they mean it literally. Two of them have argued that this and its sister sites, like nearby Tony's Mound, are among the most important earthworks ever built by hunter-gatherers anywhere on Earth. You will not be visiting. It sits on remote, protected, waterlogged land, guarded by distance and mosquitoes more than by any fence. The kind of place you reach with permission and insect repellent, or not at all. We can measure it to the foot. We still cannot tell you what it was for. In a state this paved over, that is rarer than it sounds. If you are finding this interesting, drop a thumbs up and tell us in the comments which of these you would actually want to stand in front of. We read them. We have covered the quiet end of this list so far, the strange engineering, the buried treasure, the wheel of earth. From here the tone shifts, because the places ahead were not only built, some of them were filled with the dead. Number 5. Turtle Mound, a mountain made of oysters. Drive south from New Smyrna Beach, on a thin barrier strip between Mosquito Lagoon and the Atlantic, and the land does something it is not supposed to do in Florida. It rises. A hill climbs out of the dead flat coast, dense with maritime forest, tall enough to see the open ocean from the top. The hill is made of garbage, specifically oyster shells. Turtle Mound is the largest shell midden on the mainland United States. Today it stands somewhere between 35 and 50 feet high. In earlier centuries, before erosion and quarrying took their share, it was estimated at around 75 feet, possibly with 2 pyramidal peaks. That made it the tallest pre-Columbian structure in Florida, and the third tallest in the eastern half of the country, behind only Monk's Mound at Cahokia and the long-destroyed Troyville earthworks in Louisiana. It holds roughly 33,000 cubic yards of oyster shell, spread across about 2 acres, and it was built the slow way, by the people who became the Timucua, harvesting the estuary and discarding the shells in one place for more than 500 years, between roughly 1000 BCE and 1400 of the Common Era. What started as a refuse heap became a landmark. The mound grew so tall that Spanish sailors used it to navigate, charting their position by a hill of oyster shells visible 7 miles out at sea. They called it Saruk. Whether it was only a trash pile or also a lookout, a ceremonial high point, a refuge when the storms came, is still debated. The height, at least, was real enough to steer ships by. The forest on top is its own oddity, a maritime hammock that is the northernmost outpost for several tropical plant species. From the overlook you get the lagoon on one side and the Atlantic on the other, and dolphins now and then off the point. Almost every other shell mound like it on this coast was dug up and crushed for road fill in the 1800s and 1900s. Turtle Mound survived mostly by luck. It went onto the National Register in 1970, and today you climb it on a boardwalk through that strange tropical forest, a mountain of leftovers, tall enough to steer ships by, and we nearly paved it. Number 4. Crystal River, the carved stones that should not be here. On the Gulf Coast in Citrus County, 6 earthen mounds sit along a slow river under oak and palm. Burial mounds, flat-top temple platforms, refuse mounds, and a central plaza. People gathered here for 1600 years, traveling from great distances to bury their dead, to trade, and to perform ceremonies. It is one of the longest continuously used sites in Florida, and a National Historic Landmark since 1990. By the standards of this list, that much is ordinary. Florida has many mounds. It is the 2 stones that make this place strange. In 1964, the archaeologist Ripley Bullen documented 2 carved limestone stelae standing at the site. Upright stone monuments, one about 66 inches tall, one about 41, and one of them has a human figure carved into it. That should not be here. Carved stone stelae are extraordinarily rare in the entire southeastern United States. They belong in the popular imagination to Mesoamerica, to the world of stone-carving civilizations far to the south. To find one standing on the Florida Gulf Coast set off an argument that has never fully ended. Some scholars propose direct contact with Mesoamerica. Others noticed that 2 of the platform mounds appear to line up on a deliberate alignment and suggested the whole complex worked as a kind of astronomical observatory, the mounds positioned to track events in the sky. Here is where the calm voice matters. Those are theories, not conclusions. Mainstream archaeology now leans towards something less exotic and honestly more impressive. This was a homegrown ceremonial center, plugged into a trade network that ran for hundreds of miles. The grave goods make the case. Copper ear spools, soapstone pipes, shell and coral ornaments, items of mica and stone, none of it local. The copper in particular points north, toward the Hopewell exchange systems, not south toward Mexico. So the stelae remain genuinely unusual, and the explanations for them remain genuinely unsettled, and the truth probably sits somewhere quieter than either Atlantis or aliens, which is where the worst theories always try to drag a place like this. The site itself paid a price for the modern world. About 3/4 of the Great Platform Mound was dug away decades ago and hauled off as road fill, the same fate that erased so many of the others on this list. Today, it is one of the most rewarding sites you can actually visit. There is a mid-century museum, an interpretive trail, a platform mound you can climb for a wide view over the river, manatees in the warm springs nearby in winter, and the 2 stelae, still standing where they were found. It is a stop on the Great Florida Birding Trail now, quiet and easy, the kind of place where the strangeness sneaks up on you between the parking lot and the water. A carved human face on the Gulf Coast, still waiting for everyone to agree on who put it there. Number 3. Mound Key, an island built of shells, a kingdom that beat Spain. In Estero Bay, near Fort Myers, the islands all look the same from the water. Low, green, fringed in mangrove, barely above the tide. One of them does not belong. It rises more than 30 feet, steep and forested, and from above you can see straight lines and clearings that nature does not make. That island is not natural. People built it. Mound Key was raised, over more than 2,000 years, out of shell, fishbone, and pottery by the Calusa. Carbon dating at the site reaches back to around 1150 BCE. What began as a low oyster bar in the bay was deliberately built upward, layer by layer, into a terraced island that became the capital of a kingdom. Most experts identify it as Calos, the seat of the Calusa paramount chief, the most powerful man in South Florida. And the Calusa, again, did not farm. They ran a complex, powerful monument-building society entirely on the wealth of the estuary. They engineered watercourts, enclosures for trapping and stockpiling live fish, the largest of them about 7 times the area of an NBA basketball court. Think about what that means. They built holding pens for live fish at industrial scale, the way other societies built granaries. And that surplus fed a domain of tens of thousands and supported a ruling class living on an artificial mountain of shells. Power here was measured in fish and in the labor to move shell. Here is the wild part. When the Spanish arrived, the Calusa were strong enough to host them and then throw them out. In 1566, the Spanish governor of Florida built a fort on this island and established the first Jesuit mission in the entire Spanish New World, right here on the Calusa capital. Within about 3 years, it was abandoned, after violent clashes made it impossible to stay. All told, this kingdom held European domination at arm's length for more than 200 years, something almost no other society in the colonial Southeast managed to do. By one account, the Great Hall on this island could hold around 2,000 people. That figure comes from popular tellings rather than hard proof, so hold it loosely. But even taken cautiously, it describes an urban center of real scale. Perched on a hill, the people raise themselves, one shell at a time. Today, the whole island is a state park. There are no facilities, no fresh water, and no bridge. You reach it only by boat or kayak, about 3.5 miles out across the bay, past dolphins and manatees. And you walk the old capital on a trail that crosses the island over the steep shell ridges. A kingdom that ran on fish outlasted an empire, and left its capital sitting in the bay, where anyone with a paddle can walk up its streets. Number 2. Fort Center. The birds rising from the pond of the dead. In 1926, someone pulled a carved wooden bird out of a pond on Fish-Eating Creek, in the wet country near Lake Okeechobee. That bird is the reason anyone looked closer. What they eventually found is one of the eeriest things in American archaeology. Fort Center was a settlement of the Belle Glade people, occupied for more than 2,000 years, beginning as early as 1000 BCE. It is a complex of mounds, linear embankments, and great circular ditches dug into the wet prairie, the kind of earthworks that take organization and time. But the heart of it, the thing that makes the place unforgettable, built around the year 200, was a pond. An artificial one, dug flat-bottomed, 4 to 5 feet deep, fed by groundwater. In the middle of that pond, they built a wooden platform, and around its edge, on posts, they raised carved wooden animals. Herons, eagles, woodpeckers, deer, and cat-like creatures, some of them life-size or larger, joined with mortise and tenon joints. Strikingly realistic. It was a charnel platform, a place for the dead. The bodies were defleshed and the bones bundled and laid out there, beneath the carved birds, above the dark water. At some point, the whole structure burned and collapsed into the pond. The bones were recovered and reburied in a nearby mound, and the bottom of the pond, starved of oxygen, did something rare. It preserved the wood. When the archaeologist William Sears excavated the pond in the 1960s, he brought up the carvings and the bundled remains of roughly 150 people. The wooden effigies had survived in the muck for something like 1,800 years. They are the oldest substantial collection of carved Native American wooden art in the eastern United States. Sears went further than the carvings. From corn pollen he found in the complex, he argued that these people were among the earliest to cultivate maize in eastern North America, and he floated connections to South America and the Caribbean. His peers initially treated him as a crank, dismissed the whole interpretation as off the wall. Some of his ideas were later taken more seriously, in limited form. The early corn claim is still debated. The more dramatic contact theories are not the mainstream view, and you should treat them as one man's contested argument rather than settled fact. What is not in doubt is the pond, the platform, the birds, and the dead. Today the earthworks sit on public conservation land, with a hiking trail running through live oak and very old citrus, the ground quiet and easy to walk past without ever realizing what it once held. The pond is gone, the mounds are subtle. The carved birds themselves are kept at the Florida Museum of Natural History in Gainesville, which is where the real weight of this place now lives. You can stand on the exact spot and feel almost nothing, which is its own kind of strange. The birds went into the water with the dead, and the water kept them for 1,800 years. Number 1. The Miami Circle, the stone wheel beneath the skyscrapers. You come to it through downtown Miami. Glass towers on every side, the financial district, traffic crossing the bridge over the mouth of the Miami River, water taxis below, the steady hum of a city that runs on money and is always building something taller. You walk to a low patch of open ground at Brickell Point, hemmed in by all of it, and often, when you get there, there is nothing to see because the thing you came for is buried again, covered over to protect it. Under that ground is a perfect circle cut into solid rock. 24 large holes, carved into the limestone bedrock, arranged in a ring about 38 feet across, with hundreds of smaller holes around and between them, not dug into soil, cut into the bedrock itself. It is regarded as the only known evidence in the United States of a prehistoric structure built directly into bedrock. There is nothing else like it in the eastern half of the country. Now the history. In 1998, a developer bought this lot to build a luxury condominium tower. A routine archaeological survey came first, as the law required. Crews cleared a demolished 1950s apartment building, dug through shell middens left by the Tequesta people, and hit bedrock. And in the bedrock was the ring. Burnt wood from the site radiocarbon dated to roughly 1,800 to 2,000 years old. The leading interpretation from the archaeologist Robert Carr, who led the work, is that the holes are post holes, the anchor points for a large circular building, a council house or a ceremonial structure, possibly aligned to mark events in the sky. Animal bones and unused tools, left as apparent offerings, support a ceremonial reading. Then came the fight. A modern city had a choice between a luxury condo tower and a 2,000-year-old monument carved into the ground beneath it. The battle was public, expensive, and bitter, fought between a developer with plans in hand and a city that suddenly realized what it was standing on. It could easily have gone the other way. A great many things in Miami have, but preservation won. The site was bought back and saved as open space. Here is the detail that stops people cold. Among the artifacts were 2 axe heads made of basalt. Basalt is volcanic rock. It does not exist in Florida. The nearest likely source is around Macon, Georgia, roughly 600 miles away. Someone carried volcanic stone 600 miles to a circle carved into Miami's bedrock, and we still cannot fully explain why. That single fact is what earned this place the nickname America's Stonehenge, and it is also what attracts the worst of the internet. The Atlantis theories, the ancient aliens theories, the old ugly claim that someone other than Native Americans must have built it. Set all that aside, it is wrong and the real story is better. This was the work of the Tequesta, an indigenous people who lived at this river mouth for centuries. The genuine open questions are narrower and far more interesting than any fantasy. What exactly was the circle for? And how and why did stone from 600 miles north end up cut into the ring? The circle is still there, usually kept covered to protect the soft limestone, in a patch of preserved ground surrounded by towers. So the strangest thing about visiting is that there is often nothing to look at. You stand at the railing, downtown roaring around you, over a 2,000-year-old ring you cannot see. If you want the ring itself, You mostly have to look at the photographs from 1998, when it sat open to the sky for the first time in 2 millennia, with the skyline standing over it like it had always been waiting. A perfect wheel cut into the rock, older than the city by 2 millennia, and downtown Miami built right up to its edge without ever quite explaining it. That is the strange thing about Florida. Sun, sand, and newness, poured as a thin layer over something far older. For me, the one that stays is Fort Center. Carved birds over a pond of the dead, pulled from the dark 1800 years later. Which surprised you most, and which site did we miss? Tell us in the comments. If this is the history you came for, subscribe, and we will keep finding the places the postcards leave out.